They are guides, all guides, and in unexpected places you'll meet their friendly faces, and a ready hand besides. There's not much danger of finding you're a stranger, for commissioner or ranger they are guides, all guides.
Hi, and welcome to Guides Up, the unofficial guiding podcast where we talk about everything guiding. I'm Taryn.
And I'm Marissa. In this episode, we are commemorating Remembrance Day with an episode dedicated to it. We'll start by taking a look at the origin of Remembrance Day and why it is important to us as Girl Guides.
And then we'll be learning about Dame Kelly Holmes, a retired British middle-distance athlete and a former Army sergeant and Girl Guide.
Lastly, we'll finish off the episode with a Canadian folk song called Farewell to Nova Scotia, which has its origins with the Scottish folk song The Soldier's Adieu. The song is one that fits quite nicely into our theme, as it describes the accounts of one having to bid their homeland and loved ones farewell in response to a call to take up arms.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that being said, talking about, people having to say goodbye, leave their homes in order to fight for peace and freedom with their nation overseas leads perfectly into what Remembrance Day is and why it came about. So first of all, not everyone in the world celebrates Remembrance Day, or commemorates, I should say. Remembrance Day, for those of you who aren't sure what it is, have never heard of it, was actually first observed in 1919 throughout the British Commonwealth. So that's mainly the type of countries that's commemorate it. It was actually originally called Armistice Day, and it commemorated the Armistice Agreement that ended the First World War, and that happened on Monday, November 11th, 1918 at 11 a.m., which is where the phrase on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month comes from. So 11 is a significant number for Remembrance Day. In Canada, since we were part of the British Commonwealth and also were allies in the First and Second World War with the British, we of course celebrate it, and it has a significant meaning to us. In particular, from 1921 to 1930, Armistice Day was held on the Monday of the week in which November 11th fell. So we didn't always commemorate it on November 11th, just during the week in which November 11th fell.
Interesting.
However, in 1930, but then in 1931, a member of parliament, his name was Alan Neil, he introduced a bill to observe Armistice Day only on November 11th. So that's when it changed in 1931. And that was passed by the House of Commons, of course, and that bill also ended up changing the name of it from Armistice Day to Remembrance Day, which I find a little bit easier to say.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first Remembrance Day then on was observed from November 11th, 1931. And every year, that's what we celebrate. And the way we do it is, in general, Canadians will pause in a moment of silence, usually, like I said, on the 11th hour. And we'll pause for a moment of silence to honor and remember the men and women who have served and also continue to serve Canada during times of war, conflict, and peace. And we, in particular, remember the more than 2,300,000 Canadians who have served throughout our nation's history, and more than 118,000 who made the ultimate sacrifice. So those who died in service. The poppy is a huge symbol of Remembrance Day, and in Canada, we wear these replica poppies. They're sort of made out of felt and plastic, but in general, they're sold by the Royal Canadian Legion and done through donation, and those donations help provide assistance to veterans, whether that's through service if they, have an amputation and they need extra medical care, any health bills, things like food, accommodations, anything, that they're struggling to get by with. That is what that fund is going towards to help. It also offers programs and services to veterans in the various communities across the country. So it's a very good cause. And the poppy why it's a poppy has to do with where the First World War was fought. So you might have heard of the poem In Flanders Fields. That poem was written by a Canadian physician. His name was Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. And his poem In Flanders Fields is actually one of the most quoted poems from the war. And it references the red poppies. And the poppies grew over the graves of the fallen soldiers in the Flanders region of Belgium. So Flanders is an area in Belgium. And that is why it has resulted in the remembrance poppy becoming one of the world's most recognized memorial symbols for soldiers who have died in conflict. And we are not the only ones who wear poppies. I know in the United Kingdom, they wear poppies, and same sort of thing. It's just something that you wear basically from the end of October to November 11th to commemorate it, and you wear it over your heart on the left side of your chest. So just something that is a big deal. Yeah. And the poppy and the poem are very prominent symbols throughout all of the Commonwealth nations, or a majority of them, and particularly, like I said, in Canada. But internationally, there are many nations who are not part of the Commonwealth who do observe Remembrance Day, and that includes France, Belgium, and Poland. And the reason is because they were big partners in that war in the Allies. So, and of course, like the war was fought over Belgium. France was a big also war zone, and Poland too in the Second World War was a big deal. So those countries have come to celebrate it as well because it has been a big part of their history. And then the United States also used to commemorate Armistice Day on November 11th, but since 1954, they changed the name and they call it Veterans Day. They celebrate it a little differently, but same sort of idea. Remembering soldiers who fought for peace and freedom and fallen while doing so. I'll start off by saying what I remember growing up of Remembrance Day ceremonies that happened in school. We actually had the opportunity as Girl Guide members. At my school, we were called to volunteer if we wanted to, and that meant that we got to wear our uniform on the day and take part in the assembly, and that usually looked like either helping carrying the flags or marching in with the wreaths that we would lay. But that was pretty commonplace, I think, across the nation in terms of having Remembrance Day assemblies during school. And I don't know about you, Taryn, but I definitely remember, especially when I was in Brownies and Guides, that I got to participate in the assembly.
Yeah, I remember having assemblies. In my school, we didn't do anything special because we were guiding. Each class had a representative to bring in flags or lay wreaths. But I remember going to our local parade. Was usually held the weekend before Remembrance Day. They'd go from the Legion around the corner to the Cenotaph and do a little ceremony there. And then when I was in university, I went to school in Nova Scotia where it's a provincial holiday. So I worked with a scout unit out there and a guide unit. And we had our kids fully participate. They came in uniform. They did ceremony in the university commencement hall, and then would walk to the local cenotaph, the municipal cenotaph in the area, to lay wreaths and poppies.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I only just learned this by doing this research, that it is a statutory holiday in some of the provinces, but not all of the provinces. And Ontario, surprisingly, is not one of them.
It's one of the few, right?
Yeah, there's a majority of them. Provinces and territories commemorate that day as a holiday, so to speak. And I find that surprising because in Ontario, there are some really big military bases. Like there's one in Kingston. Ottawa is heavily known because it's the capital of Canada. I just find it really surprising that it's not. And yeah, I don't know. It's weird. So that's basically the summation of what it is for us in Canada. But in terms of Girl Guide related, the reason that it's so big for Girl Guides is, of course, as we've mentioned in previous podcast episodes, Girl Guides had a huge role in the wars, especially in the First and Second World Wars. So they had, that was an active service that they took on, and some were more directly involved than others. But it all sort of stems back, of course, to Lord Baden-Powell. He was a general for the British Army during the Boer War, and he was actually regarded for his ingenuity and how he trained his troops in certain skills like independent thinking, resourcefulness, and wilderness survival. Those are really key things that you should know as somebody who's in the Army in any role, whether it's the Navy, the Air, whatever the air one is called. Anyway, it doesn't matter whether you're in the air, ground, or in the water. They're all skills that you should have. And so that, of course, came through into guiding and scouting those skills. So even though we have changed a lot since it began over 100 years ago, the ideals still run through a lot of the aspects of our programming. So the concept of being a good citizen within your community, and that in particular is also something that the military teaches every man and woman who serves. So you're still learning like how to build a fire, how to build a lean-to, and how to survive in the woods. And that's actually all mandatory training for all of the air crew in the Canadian forces here. Because, if you crash land, you definitely need to know how to set up shelter for yourself.
Definitely.
Very interesting. And I'll just briefly glance over this because we've pretty much talked about it in previous episodes. But like I said, Girl Guides of Canada members have made very significant contributions to the Canadian war effort during the 20th century in particular. So, from working in the factories, making clothing and dressings and bandages for the soldiers, as well as, assisting in the fundraising and the distribution of leaflets for war relief societies. And, of course, they had a 2-year National War Service project, which we've talked about as well. That was really big. But overall, there's a lot in our national archives that sort of give a glimpse into how the Girl Guides demonstrated bravery, ingenuity, and selflessness during one of our nation's most difficult times. And that sort of makes you think, like, right now, what are Girl Guides doing? And there's a lot that Girl Guides are doing during, yet again, another very difficult time. Girls have been sewing masks together, looking out for the elderly in their neighborhoods, giving them a call, showing up and trying to make them feel like they have someone to talk to and they're not alone.
Writing letters to nursing homes.
Yeah, there's a lot. Doing the groceries for the adult members, maybe of guiding, getting groceries for those who can't leave their homes.
Yeah.
So, we have a proud history of doing that and continues to be like that moving forward. And so, like, that is a very good example of how we have had a very long and strong history of community service. So back to Remembrance Day, in that term, it's not only a part of our history, but it's also a privilege to take the time to remember and appreciate what our military has done to make Canada the nation that it is in terms of having the freedoms that we have, having peace, rights, and responsibilities. And as, generations pass and Canada's involvement in international conflict changes, it's really like a form of obligation that we need to remember and to teach the new generations why we as Canadians get to live in a country that is free and safe. And, the veterans are slowly, fading away. They're passing away. They're getting, past the point of being able to share that information. And it's something that, therefore, we need to continue to pass on, and why we still celebrate and make a big deal out of it in Girl Guides.
Yeah.
there are actually specific activities and program bits that you can earn. And another big connection that we have is the song Taps that we sing at the end of the night. And the reason being is that actually it was a way to sort of signal lights out, when you were in the army and it's time to, turn your lights off, go to bed. It was originally composed by a general who was fighting during the American Civil War. So it's over 132 years old. And this man, his name is Daniel Butterfield. He wrote it in Virginia in July of 1862. And it basically replaced the customary firing of the 3 rifle volleys at the end of burials during battle. So normally you would just hear 3 gunshots, but he came up with that bugle call, and that is then what signified burials during battle. So yeah, it's now become a very common thing to do. And it's, like I said, one of the final bugle calls of the day on military installations. It's played usually at 10 p.m. and as a signal to service members that it is lights out, end of the day. So very commonplace. And that's sort of a little connection that we have, again, with the military. Going forward, I looked at a cool blog post on the Canadian Guiding blog, and they get often a lot of guest guiders coming in to write. And one of them, her name is Guider Michelle, and she wrote about how they invited a woman from the Canadian Forces to their guide meeting. And it was actually really interesting to hear about what she said to the girls and what she did with them. So her name is Rebecca Garnham, and she's a lieutenant, and she's stationed, as of the blog post, she was stationed in Calgary, and she helped to train new recruits in the Navy before they headed off for their very first assignments. But what's most intriguing about her visit was that she was a former Girl Guide herself. So we've got sort of a mini, she was a Girl Guide, in this episode. And Lieutenant Garnham talked about how members in guiding and the military both make a promise to make the world a better place. And she also shared about how the sisterhood of guiding is a lot like the sisterhood that she shares with her fellow women in the military. So very cool to hear from a woman like her. They also heard about how women started in the military as nurses, and also heard about names of female trailblazers who've made it possible for women today to hold any position in the Canadian military, because of course that was very much not happening 100 years ago, less than 100 years ago, really. So, she really got to share about that. And, a lot of those women who are in the military have a guiding background, which is cool. And it also is a good opportunity for girls to discover different opportunities in the military. If that's something that they wish to do, you do not necessarily have to fight. You can actually take on positions that are more focused on science, or technology, or engineering and math, and peacekeeping duties in particular. So something to think about if that's something that you're interested in. And like I said about Remembrance Day, in terms of activities, there's actually quite a bit on Girls First. And this is an article actually from this year. They published it on November 6th, so only a few days ago. And they recommended some instant meetings that you could do with your unit. One is called Guiding Remembers, and it was inspired by BC Council's Guiding Remembers Challenge. So it includes some activities called Stories of Service, Voices of Veterans, and In Flanders Fields. And all of those activities help girls reflect on the idea of remembrance in their own way, while also acknowledging the efforts of Canadian veterans of both the past and the present. So if you're not sure what to do for Remembrance Day, these activities are great because they're already planned out and you don't really have to put a lot of thought into it. You can just pick them up and go and get your girls involved that way. There is also a instant meeting called Canadian Women of Valor, and it's again modified from Alberta Council's instant meeting of the very same name, and it was actually updated in partnership with Valor Canada. So it has some really good information in it as well. And some of the activities are more hands-on. There's one called Ration Recipes and another one called Wartime Women, and they both are great. From what I've heard, I've actually seen somebody use the wartime rations one or rations recipe, and you can make these very basic cookies with your girls, and a lot of people have been doing it virtually. And it's like the most basic of ingredients, because back then, of course, you didn't have all the ingredients, like the niceties of butter and like sugar. So they're like very simple, which is perfect for virtual because not everyone will have the same ingredients at home, but they are very likely to have like the basics of flour and like water or whatever else calls for.
Yeah.
So it's one to look out for. And the Wartime Women one is really good because it gives the girls a glance into, you know, what roles the women played in both the First and Second World Wars, and get a little bit of a closer look at that. So those are fun things to look into if you're looking for something to do. It's only 2 days away, but I mean, by the time this episode comes out, it'll be a day later. But if you're still thinking of wanting to do something, it's something to look at. And the last thing I found, which was really interesting, is that Girl Guides of Canada commissioned a nationwide survey in the fall of 2018, where they talked to more than 500 girls in Canada, ages 14 to 17, about their feelings on Remembrance Day, as well as their feelings on war and peace. So very specific. And the findings are kind of interesting. Because, of course, they grew up it's a slightly younger generation than me and definitely than Taryn. So growing up, learning about Remembrance Day is maybe a little different for them. And some of the big things that the girls told them is that, first of all, to them, Remembrance Day is mostly about reflecting on the past, but also thinking about the very real impact of the global conflicts that are happening today, and there are a lot of them. Girls also shared that they see Remembrance Day as just an important time to honor the sacrifices of those who've served their country, whether that be soldiers abroad or people here on the home front. And they also believe that Remembrance Day, it's about honoring peace builders and thinking of those currently affected by war around the world, just in general. So, very broad opinion. It definitely has a focus on conflict that is currently happening and on a global scale, because as Canadians, we don't necessarily see it here. I mean, you might get a few things, especially when it comes to like terrorists or supposedly terrorist attacks, you know, in various of the bigger cities here in North America. You see it a little bit more in the United States, but that can sometimes feel like it's a little too close for comfort. But getting them to think, you know, globally, and that there's, you know, girls their age just in another country, sometimes not too far, that are facing these very real fears. It's something that they're actually quite aware of. And girls today in the survey said that they often have a personal connection to the impact of war beyond just learning these things in their classrooms or with their Girl Guide unit. So many girls in Canada have actually welcomed people who have fled global conflicts into their own communities, into their classrooms, into their Girl Guide units. Ones that I can think of that are some of the most recent and the biggest are refugees from Syria. We had a lot come into Canada as refugees, and a lot of them welcomed into our communities, and a lot of people helped them out, whether it came to like buying winter clothes for them, helping them sort of navigate the world here in Canada, taking them to see like some of the big sites, and, you know, getting them adjusted to life in Canada. I know a lot of them came in the middle of winter. I forget what year that was, but a lot of people stepped up, and a lot of those people were interacting with Girl Guides, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So those girls have that sort of secondhand experience of hearing from these girls coming from, you know, war-torn countries. Some also just have neighbors or family members who have been deployed overseas. So again, another sort of secondhand experience, hearing from somebody else they know, maybe closer related because they're family members. And then, of course, there are the girls who have actually even themselves experienced conflict firsthand. So maybe they are the refugees coming from those countries. And they can come from all over the world. The conflicts, you know, again, like I said, can be really close to home. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they have quite the broad experience. And today, Girl Guides tries to continue to connect with members of Canada's military, as well as welcome newcomers and refugees in our communities, like I just mentioned. So it's a big deal, again, to be able to participate in Remembrance Day. I'm not sure what Remembrance Day looked like last year or the years prior. It's been a while since I have gone to a school assembly, of course.
Yeah.
I don't know if Girl Guides are still welcomed in some of the schools to join in the assemblies. I would like to think that would be something they still do, but again, not every school does it. So, but yeah, it's a big deal here. Mm-hmm. And something we like to take time for.
Yeah, when I was doing Sparks and Markham, one of our dads was a vet, and he very generously came in for a number of years, Remembrance Week, and would have a meeting, do, you know, some fun activities with the girls. And because he was a dad, he knew kind of how to speak to the kids to make sure, like, they could understand and, like, it wasn't too overwhelming or too scary, which was really nice. Yeah, and the girls always had fun. It was a great way to, you know, teach the girls at a young age that, you know, this is, you know, everywhere and it's not that bad. Yeah, and that brings us to our She Was a Girl Guide You Know this week, Dame Kelly Holmes.
Nancy Reagan, Helen Hayes, Jan Davis, Jean Sauvé, Carrie Fisher, William's sister, Shirley Temple Black, Tammy Duckworth, Kathy Frost, Candace Bergen, Lucille Ball, Debbie Reynolds, Princess Margaret, Hillary Clinton. Did you know she was a girl guide? Busting down the door 100 years or more. Did you know she was a girl guide? Here to let you know she was a guide, you know. Did you know she was a girl guide? Here to let you know she was
Dame Kelly Holmes was born August 19th, 1970 in Kent, England. She is mixed race. Her dad, Derek, is a Jamaican-born mechanic. And her mom, Pam, was English-born. However, Derek ended up leaving before Kelly turned 1. And Pam ended up marrying Michael Norris, who Kelly regards as her father. He was there for most of her childhood and helped raise her. When Kelly's mom, Pam, had Kelly, she was still a teenager. She was only 17. And Kelly's grandparents really encouraged Pam to give Kelly up for adoption, but she was determined not to give her up and eventually married Michael. And Pam and Michael had two little boys. So Kelly had some little brothers around the house with her. She got started in athletics, mostly in track and field, when she joined her school's athletics club when she was 12. And stuck around for the rest of the time she was in school. However, she wasn't a stellar student and ended up dropping out of school when she was 16. to work in a sweet shop and as a nursing assistant in a home for the elderly before she joined the Army when she was 18. So you can tell, like, really early she had some great role models and was a very sweet and caring person, which comes up over and over again. And one of her earliest role models, especially in athletics, is Steve Ovett, who is a middle distance runner who won a gold and bronze medal in the 1980 Moscow Olympics for Britain. And she saw that and really it helped inspire her to run, and she followed his career for a while. It definitely encouraged her to become the athlete she was. When she turned 18, she joined the Army and was assigned to the Women's Royal Army Corps. And at the time, all British Army members, or all women in the British Army, were a part of the Women's Royal Army Corps. And the Women's Army Corps existed from 1940 to 1992 and included all women in the British Army except for medical, dental, veterinarians, chaplains, and nurses. So pretty big division, kind of wide-ranging. And while she was there, she, like I said, started as a truck driver, but then eventually became the physical basic training instructor. So again, that athletic history kind of followed her. In 1990, when she was 20, she was elected to join the first course of the new physical training syllabus of the British Army. And through that, she became a Class 2 physical training instructor. And because of that and her athleticism, Kelly was encouraged to join the Royal Army Physical Training Corps and eventually qualified as a Sergeant Class 1 physical training instructor. She was an adjunct member of the Physical Training Corps until the disbandment of the Women's Army Corps in 1992, but worked closely with them. While she was in the training corps, she became the judo champion in the Army, and at a competition, she ended up competing in the men's 1,500 meter race because it would be considered embarrassing for the other competitors if she ran the women's race. Again, showing her speed and stamina, that she was, it was considered just made more sense to put her in with the men. At a different Army track event, she ran and won the 800 meter, the 3,000 meter, and a relay race all in one day. And then in the summer of 1992, when the Olympics were in Barcelona, she watched one of her former competitors, Lisa York, race, and she decided that if she could run and race in the Olympics, that Kelly could as well, and that's what spurred her return to athletics. And then she balanced the two careers until 1997, when she was able to receive enough funding to become a full-time athlete. Her athletic career was pretty inspiring and astounding, considering the age that she was when she really got started. Her first big games as an athlete was the Commonwealth Games in 1994, when she was already 24, which is a pretty big deal in athletics. They tend to be a little bit younger due to the high stress it puts on your body. And then she also won silver medals in both the European and World Championships in 1994 and 1995. So definitely while she started late, she came on big. And she struggled with a number of health problems during her athletic careers. She had glandular fever, which is similar to mono. And while you can be like fully recovered within a couple of weeks, there's lingering fatigue that can last for months afterwards, which can be a big problem if you're a professional athlete. Fatigue doesn't really go well with that. She also struggled with typical runner problems like ruptured calf muscle and torn Achilles. She also had twisted ovaries, which just I feel so bad for her. I was reading through it and I was like, oh man.
So, like, how does that even happen? Twisted ovaries. I don't want to know.
Yeah. So, like, through her whole professional athletics career, she was struggling with some sort of illness or injury. And it got really bad in 2003 when she was training in France to prepare for the 2004 Athens Olympics, where she suffered a leg injury and got really depressed. She started self-harming and considered suicide. She eventually reached out to a doctor and ended up taking herbal serotonin. And they went with that route because more traditional antidepressants would affect her racing performance. So they decided to try something else that would still give her those benefits. Kelly, being kind of stubborn, as you'll see throughout, recovered from her leg injury and her mental health struggles and arrived in Athens with no injuries for the first time in her career. So she started racing professionally in 94. So 10 years later was her first major event with no injury or illness. During the time in Athens, she ended up becoming the third woman to double medal in the 800 and 1500 meter races in the same games, and set a British record for time in the 1500 meter at just under 4 minutes. Like an absolutely outstanding performance. And due to that, she was selected to be the flag bearer at the closing ceremonies for Britain. So at the time of her athletic debut, or Olympic debut, sorry, she was 34. And because of all those injuries I talked about earlier, she wasn't expected to do particularly well. Especially because she was significantly past her peak. For reference, Usain Bolt was considered really old when he retired, and he was 31. So, like, racing at the Olympics at 34 is unheard of. She ended up retiring not long at the end of the 2004 season after another race, and just her body couldn't keep up anymore, and she just kind of decided to move on. She has openly struggled with her mental health over the years and has openly talked about it. She's written a couple autobiographies, especially after the Olympics, where she was especially candid about her struggles. And this was in the early 2000s, so a long time before people were as open talking about this as they are today. And when asked about why she's so open about her mental health, she says, "I've been at the lowest point and to the highest point and everything in between." She feels that she can share kind of her struggles and help people that way. In 2013, she created a 11-part series podcast where she interviewed different celebrities about their struggles. And she said, it shows that we can all go through life and have struggles and still actually achieve. If that's empowering for other people, that would be really nice. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to listen to it, but it's available from audible.com or .ca. And it's called What Do I Do? Mental Health and Me. And she's been praised for being a great host, being able to really listen and let her guests kind of speak, and not pressuring them and letting them have the space they need to share their difficult moments. In her post-athletic career, she was named the president of the Commonwealth Games of England, succeeding Sir Charles Chataway in 2009. So went from racing pretty quickly to still staying in the sport community, but a step back. In 2014, she opened a cafe and a community hub called Cafe 1809, which was the bib number she wore in the Olympics. It originally opened as a cafe, but they couldn't stay afloat, so she closed down and has recently reopened as a space for events, pop-ups, and community gatherings. And the space that she has bought was the original sweet shop she worked at when she was still a teenager, which is, I think, really sweet.
Mm-hmm.
In 2017, she presented an episode on a BBC One series called Women at War, 100 Years of Service, sharing, 100 years of women in service through the British Army and what women have gone through over the years. Later that year, so still in 2017, she spoke publicly in her mental health issues in an episode of On the Mind, a weekly radio program about psychology and psychiatry for BBC Radio 4. So again, speaking publicly, sharing her struggles. She started a registered charity not long after she left athletics, and it supports retired athletes as they transition from sports and uses their skills and experience to transform the lives of disadvantaged youth through mentoring programs. And it supports young people between the ages of 14 and 25. She said that she noticed a lot of young people are leaving sport and were kind of lost to what to do. They felt like they couldn't really take the skills that they had in sport or developed through sport and transition to a meaningful life afterwards. So this gives them a little bit more concrete skills to help with that. Bringing Kelly Holmes into today, she has recently tested positive for COVID after filming something for BBC Sport. I looked around, I couldn't really tell what. But she has been pretty funny and candid about it on Twitter. She appears to have like a serious but relatively mild case. Some of her symptoms she's included has been the typical smell and taste loss and headaches and body aches. But she seems to be getting better. I haven't checked in the last couple days, but when I was making my notes up last week, she seemed to be getting better. And has added a little humor into the situation by tweeting out, you have COVID when toothpaste, cheese, peanut butter, and Marmite all taste the same, like nothing. So her spirits are staying up. Hopefully she gets better soon. Some of her awards and honors that she's talked about is in 1998, she received a member of the Order of the British Empire for services in the British Army. In 2004, after her outstanding performance in the Olympics, she was awarded the Sports Personality of the Year. In 2005, she was given the title of Dame as a commander of the Order of the British Empire for services to athletics. In 2010, she was introduced to the England Athletics Hall of Fame, and in 2018, she was named an honorary colonel of the Royal Armoured Corps Training Regiment, which she was pretty excited about. She said somewhere, I can't remember where, that she was the first Dame colonel in the world. There's a quote that Kelly has said about what guiding has meant to her, and that what guiding helps you be is it helps you be the best you can be. She tries to continue to inspire others to reach their full potential. And a recent survey of Girl Guiding UK revealed that 86% of them believe Dame Kelly to be the country's best female role model, which is pretty clear. I feel like I did a super high overview of everything she's done. But it's hard to kind of boil everything down into like a couple of points. She's just so well-rounded and kind of is doing a little bit of everything. It's hard to like kind of boil everything down to one or two points to talk about. But yeah.
I was going to say it's really impressive what she's done, and especially for her time, like where she was in terms of timeline in the world, like in the 90s, right? Like being in the army and like then deciding like later to start
racing,
being more athletic and making a career out of it. Like that is astonishing. And the fact that she was able to medal and to go to the Olympics at the age of 34, like that is incredible. And also, like you said, that it is quite significant that she was open about her mental health, because like I don't think anybody really was, unless like you were, it was very much not common at all. And, you know, a decade or so later it now is, but it totally wasn't. And that just goes to show that programs and other people like her talking about it has made people feel more willing to share things like that, because it has become so commonplace. You know, hearing from someone like her who is an athlete, someone who was formerly in the army, you know, like all these things, like she experienced it too, experiences probably still to this day and to some degree. So incredible to be able to hear from her. And like the Girl Guides believe in the UK, like a very, very good role model because of that.
And she doesn't, like athletes today still don't really talk about mental health struggles. So being a female athlete to like talk about it and so openly and continue to stand up and talk about it is a big deal. But yeah, she's so entertaining. You should follow her Twitter. She's pretty entertaining, especially with this COVID stuff. Definitely lighthearted. And
yeah, you got to do something while you're put up at home, feet up on the couch, you know, not feeling like doing anything. I can imagine. But
the first place I saw that she got diagnosed with COVID was from some UK article or newspaper or tabloid or something. And then I was doing a little bit more poking around, and so in the first article I read, it said that she got it when she was away on vacation and somewhere else in Europe. And she was like, nope, not at all. I was working like in Kent with BBC Sport, like someone there tested positive and spread it. Like, was not a vacation. I've been like home and keeping safe. Yeah, not afraid to call out people at all. Yeah. And I guess that brings us to our campfire song this week, Farewell to Nova Scotia.
Farewell to Nova Scotia, the sea-bound coast. Let your mountains dark and dreary be. For when I am far away on the briny ocean tossed, will you ever heave a sigh and a wish for me?
So, Farewell to Nova Scotia is a song that is also known as the Nova Scotia song, and it is technically the official song of Nova Scotia, a province in Ontario, Canada. Not Ontario, oh my gosh, that's another province. Nova Scotia is a province in Canada. So this song, it's a folk song, actually has unknown authorship, at least the Farewell to Nova Scotia version, but it was believed to have been written shortly before or during the First World War. So there's our connection again. And it was actually derived from another song called The Soldier's Adieu, which is a Scottish folk song written in 1791 and printed in 1803 in a Scottish newspaper that was attributed to a Scottish poet by the name of Robert Tannahill. So he's supposedly the known author of The Soldier's Adieu. So that's sort of where it began. And from there, it's sort of unknown as to when it was adapted by Nova Scotians, but it is known that the song was changed to reflect differently a soldier's sorrow at leaving the hills behind as he heads out to sea. The tune itself is Good Night and Joy Be With Ye, which actually first appears in recorded history as early as 1625, so the tune. And now the Scottish version of the song is often titled Good Night and Joy. So although the origin of this particular adaptation is unknown, it does have many, many versions that have been recorded over the years. And it actually makes this song one of the most popular traditional songs in the small maritime province of Nova Scotia. So Nova Scotia is one of Canada's most eastern provinces, and it is surrounded almost entirely by water. In terms of history, Scottish settlers arrived in the early 17th century, and they called the region Nova Scotia, which is Latin for New Scotland. And they sort of named it in a response to the naming of an American territory to the south called New England, which refers to several states sort of in that northeastern area of the U.S. There's several states that are part of it, including, I know, Massachusetts. There are several more, but it's sort of an area. So that was their response. They wanted to call this part Nova Scotia. So the tune and the lyrics themselves are actually public domain, which means that they're free for use. You do not have to pay for any of the rights, which is really nice. That also means that many artists have, of course, released their own recordings of the song. including several Canadian artists, such as Gordon Lightfoot, the Irish Rovers, who are technically Irish, but came to Canada and grew up in Canada and met there. There's also Anne Murray and, of course, Stompin' Tom Connors. Those are all very Canadian names, but they're all great artists. And on the website, The Scots Language, there is a recording of the Nova Scotia song that you can listen to, and it comes from a song on a scratched metal disc, which was a method in which they recorded songs. And that was recorded in 1943 by a man called Walter Roast, and he was from East Chesapeake, Nova Scotia. And his version is a very authentic sound to the song. He must have that sort of Scottish or Nova Scotian accent because you can really hear it. It's very unique. Definitely recommend listening to that version. We'll have it up somewhere for you to hear. Yeah. But yeah, overall, it's a nice song. I actually remember learning it when I was in grade 7 in music class, because of course we were learning all these traditional Canadian like folk songs and what they often call, the very typical East Coast Canadian folk songs. So it's one that I know the lyrics to very well. At least the first verse and chorus I know pretty well. So it's a nice song. I think it has some sad lyrics to it, but it can be pretty upbeat.
Yeah. It's a fun song. I learned it because one of my best friends, Jake, one of my best friends in elementary school is from the Maritimes, and would often sing it. We'd sing it at campfires. Yeah. Sorry, I got a puppy last week, and he's being a little rambunctious. But that brings us to the end of this week's episode. So make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform: Spotify, Apple, Google, YouTube, wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Wherever you may find us, give us a 5-star rating and a review to let us know that you're listening and enjoying.
And as always, you can always follow us on social media. We're at Guide Zone on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And good to follow us there so you can keep up to date with any of the newest episodes, any podcast news, and of course the behind the scenes bits. We especially share news like how the Babysitters Club has now gotten a second season. So just check out our social media accounts for things like that.
There might be some photos of some cute puppies too.
Yes. He's going to be an honorary member of this podcast.
He will. And as we part, you wish all our listeners good guiding.
Good guiding.
Oh.
Day is done. Gone the sun, from the lake, from the hills, from the sky. All is well, safely rest, peace is nigh.